Good morning, I'm Pierangelo Isegna. I am the director of the Center of Excellence of the University of Siena, CREDO, Cultural Relations and Diplomacy. With this video, I want to launch a new initiative of our center that is a set of videos to academics and practitioners on what are the latest developments in the study and practice of international cultural relations. So we invite all of you to stay tuned for the next coming developments of our center.
Hello, good morning. Law and religion as a field brings together experts and scholars with very different backgrounds. And historically and theoretically, first of all, I think most of us started from the ideal of separation and state neutrality. In some cases, disestablishment of, in particular, church and state in Christian countries for the sake of freedom. So this is a very important engine, and this was a very strong vector for starting from law and religion and then heading into religious diplomacy. So with a strong sense that separation and state neutrality should be enhanced for the sake of freedom and of freedom of religious communities on the one hand, and of course states on the other. And this was again a step in the history of the West, and I would say and beyond. And then we were confronted with a second step and probably a second need and demand, and that was the demand for dialogue and partnership and cooperation. And this was, again, an integral part of law and religion as a field of scholarship and also as a field of teaching, of education. And this was also putting us, the experts, towards religious diplomacy. So in a way, if you want to relate law and religion in particular, and religious diplomacy, I would do that through those two steps and phases and elements, basically. On the one hand, separation and neutrality for freedom, and on the other hand, freedom-based, freedom-fed cooperation, and especially cooperation amongst religious actors and between religious actors and government. And this is how I would define, well, it's a simplistic definition, but it is possible to define religious diplomacy in the first place as an area of freedom on the one hand and cooperation on the other. Of course, then it is possible to add much more to the area of religious freedom. But as far as those like myself with a law and religion background, I would say that as far as the definition of religious diplomacy is concerned, these two elements are really defined. Challenges, I would say, first of all, a challenge in, let's call it methodology, especially after the World War II codification of international human rights. We were all committed to universal rights and to an international conversation. And this applied very strongly to religious freedom. And again, this influenced religious diplomacy very much. So the universality of religious freedom. And then progressively, we were confronted with this element, this aspect of religious freedom, to some extent, not to be enough, as we realized that in order for religious freedom to be truly universal, we needed to face contexts and specificities, including specificities of cultures, countries, language, customs, rules of different forms I would say the first challenge, what I define as the methodological challenge, was and still is, of course, how to combine the universal nature and aspiration of religious freedom and its context. The necessity for religious freedom to make sense somewhere for a specific community. The other challenge, which I would see as a more content related, comes with the progressive change in the perception and experience of the two terms of religious freedom. So religion on the one hand and freedom on the other. We have been confronted, partly because the reality was changing, partly because our understanding of reality was changing, with a big change in what religion means. Each of us was, of course, starting from the definition of religion, which was predominant in our own context. So for myself, it was, of course, a Christianity-based definition of religion. But then in an international conversation, all of us needed to apprehend new ways of understanding religion. And the definition of religion and the mobilization of religion was also changing in the meantime. And the same applied to freedom. So this is, well, the second challenge, let's say major challenge, which comes to my mind as you ask me the question, the challenge of changing concepts and perceptions of religion on the one hand and freedom of the other. Let's say context is very important. And I think you need to be very alert to context, as I mentioned in my previous answer, to context and the changing context. So law and religion, of course, there is a theory of law and religion. Actually, there are multiple theories of religious freedom and religious diplomacy. But first of all, you are confronted with the reality, and I would say this is the first ingredient you need for your recipe. And then you have of course principles, and of course we all work on principles of action, constitutional principles, human rights principles. And then it is very important that we take a position vis-a-vis principle, that we also engage in a conversation about principles, and I would say ideals. But there again, then we need a sort of circular process whereby contexts are challenged by principles, and in turn the principles are challenged by context. And it is, well, by virtue of that process that you can learn some, a deeper understanding of the interaction of law and religion. And especially, I would say that's how you gain a deeper understanding, which can be functional, instrumental to a dialogue and a conversation between people of different backgrounds. So I can think of my involvement in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe as personally a major inspiration, and also as a fundamental lesson for me. Now, you need to know that the OSCE is based on the political commitment and the political consensus amongst states and governments, which means that this is not built on a legally binding infrastructure. And this is often seen as a fundamental limitation. Well, actually, it is a fundamental limitation to the OSCE. And yet, there is a lot which has been done in that context, in the direction of freedom of religion or belief. And I would take what is experienced within the OSCE as a major example of religious diplomacy as well. Of course, that example pertains to intergovernmental action. So it's a sort of state-based example that I'm giving. And I was involved in the OSCE as a member of the panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief. And I think that to some extent, the impact was pretty remarkable, at least in terms of monitoring and raising the awareness about crisis of freedom of religion or belief, but also in terms of literacy about freedom of religion or belief. Of course, when you produce documents, you are constantly exposed to the risk that it's just blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, you increasing literacy. And I think that we were pretty successful in that regard. The other example, quickly, is the G20 Interfaith Forum. This is an example of a different nature. This is a platform of mainly faith-based actors. Other actors are also involved, neutral actors, secular actors, government to some extent, the academia. I was involved myself as a professor of a public, non-confessional, non-denominational university in Italy. And this other example is more relevant in terms of what can be achieved through a multilateral and multi-actor conversation, where religion as a factor and religious actors as subjects are involved with the global struggle for sustainable development and the future of mankind and the planet. And I think that this is another example that I can talk about based on my experience. The stress is strong. I mean, religious diplomacy is undergoing a fundamental stress test, which is not new, by the way, but of course, religion is often identified as a justification for conflict. Of course, it is always possible to talk about exploitation of religion, in this case, or falsification of religion, but still religion is involved in conflicts. And I expect a lot of experts and a lot of people in the global public opinion to be skeptical, precisely because religion is identified as the problem, and precisely because religious diplomacy can be seen as a sort of augmented problem insofar as religion is invited in the sphere of politics and international politics. But if this is true, it is also true that religion as such, as I said, and even again religious diplomacy is also seen as a part of the solution. And so I expect religious diplomacy to be again seen in very polarized terms, again, as the problem and as the solution. Scholars are not very happy about this dichotomy, frankly, but this is how I expect people to look at religion in international affairs in the future. And the response for those who believe that religious diplomacy is a possibility, if not a necessity, is to keep working on, again, the changing nature and definition of both terms, religion and diplomacy. In order for religious diplomacy to be somehow effective and successful, we need to work differently on religion and take into account multiple factors in religion, and possibly also work in the direction of some different religious attitudes. Best example could be interfaith dialogue, for instance, or dialogue across religious lines. And the same would also apply to diplomacy. For instance, emphasizing the importance of cultural diplomacy in the context of diplomacy as a whole. So without, of course, underestimating the role of traditional diplomacy, but diplomacy is also changing, and religious diplomacy should be a factor in the desirable change of diplomacy as such. The background of those who got interested in religious diplomacy so far has been legal scholarship, mainly in law and religion, not exclusively, but like myself, people interested in law and religion, or in international law or human rights law, or people with an interest in international affairs from political, political studies, political science, or sociology. And this is still probably where a strong investment in terms of education and training is needed. But I hold as extremely important to invite experts and activists with many other backgrounds, many other different backgrounds to the table. We need anthropologists, we need psychologists, we need people with a background in economics, and also we also need people, in data analysis or in computer science. We need people with a background in neuroscience. So for the future of religious diplomacy, we need people with many different backgrounds in more or less traditional specialties and disciplines. And also, I would add, in cross-cutting disciplines, development studies or innovation studies, for instance. And this is the kind of conversation that I have in mind. And then, of course, we also need to invite both theoretical work and impact work. And so sort of research and action at the same time. This is very, very, very important. And then what we need is also organizations. We need faith-based NGOs of a different kind, a new generation of participatory actors. And in general, I would say we need to open up the conversation, to make it, plural, to invite creativity in the way things are thought of, and in the way things are made through on the ground.